I stood in the darkened gallery, watching the man I'd legally vowed to love through sickness and health make a fool of himself over a woman who was currently embezzling him blind. Julian was leaning back in his Herman Miller chair, grinning at something Chloe Davis had just murmured in his ear. It wasn't a professional smile. It was the look of a man who thought he was still 25 and irresistible. Pathetic. Marcus. I whispered into the comms bead tucked against my ear, my voice flat. Pull up the Cayman wires for CD holdings. I want the exact figure. Already streaming to your tablet. Mrs. Vance. Marcus Reed's voice came back, crisp and efficient as always. 4.2 million. Even. Last transfer hit her personal flagged account at 4:30 this morning while Julian was working late on the Q3 deck. 4.2 million. That was the price tag for his ego. I watched Chloe lean over to adjust his tie, her fingers lingering on his collar. He caught her wrist, giving it a proprietary squeeze. The same wrist that wore a Cartier tank watch I hadn't authorized. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The low hum of the conference room died instantly. Julian's smile vanished, replaced by the familiar, petulant frown he wore whenever I interrupted his genius. Elena? He straightened up so fast his knee banged the table. What the hell are you doing here? We're in the middle of a closed-door session. I can see that. Julian, I said, placing my tablet face up on the polished mahogany. The screen glowed with a forensic trail of wire transfers. Chloe, could you excuse us? I need to discuss some irregularities in the compensation structure. Chloe's face paled, but she recovered fast. She shifted into that wide-eyed, victimized act she'd perfected. Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry. If this is about the overtime, Julian, Mr. Vance said it was fine. I've just been trying to help him keep the lights on. Julian stepped in front of her, shielding her like a human shield. Elena, back off. If this is about the hours, I signed off on them. Chloe's been killing herself to fix the mess you left in the operating account last quarter. She's indispensable. Indispensable. She was bleeding the company dry, and he thought she was indispensable. I felt a cold, clinical detachment, like reviewing a bad balance sheet. I'm not discussing the hours. Julian, I said, tapping the screen to zoom in on a specific routing number. Im discussing CD holdings. Chloe. Does the C stand for Chloe? Because unless you've started a side hustle in construction, I'm fairly certain you've been routing Vance Capital funds into a personal offshore entity. Chloe's lower lip started to tremble. Real tears welled up. Julian, please, I wanted to tell you, it's for my mom's treatments. The insurance won't cover the new meds. I was going to pay it back. I swear. I just got scared when Mrs. Vance started asking questions. She reached for his hand. He took it. He actually threaded his fingers through hers. Elena, look at her. Julian snapped, his voice climbing an octave. She's terrified. We don't need to involve HR or lawyers. I'll handle it. I'll dock her pay. Just let me talk to her privately. I tilted my head, studying him. 10 years. 10 years of me funding his Ivy League connections, his Park Avenue office, and his visionary trades that were, statistically speaking, no better than a coin flip. And he was choosing a thief over me because she played the damsel in distress. Handle it? I repeated softly. Julian, I am the majority shareholder. I am the one handling it. You're not handling the fallout. You're enabling a felony. Section 4B of the postnup you signed is very clear on financial malfeasance. Stop hiding behind that goddamn prenup. He roared, standing up. You've always hated that I have someone competent helping me. You're just jealous because she's better at her job than you ever were at being a wife. All you do is count pennies while I build an empire. The silence in the room was deafening. Chloe buried her face in Julian's chest, her shoulders shaking with convincing sobs. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply looked at him and said, "An empire? Julian, you can't even balance a checkbook without my CFO signing off. And as of 60 seconds ago, you don't have a checkbook to balance." I tapped the tablet again. "Marcus, execute the liquidity freeze on all Vance-linked assets, personal and professional. Notify the compliance department that Chloe Davis is to be escorted from the building pending an FBI investigation." "Elena, you can't do this." Julian lunged across the table, his hands sweeping my tablet to the floor. It clattered, the screen cracking. "That's our money. Our life." "It was never our money, Julian." I corrected him, stepping back from the shattered device. "It was mine. Every cent. The penthouse. The cars. The tuition for your brother's rehab, all me. And as of this second, your Amex Black Card is declining at the register. Your personal checking account is sitting at exactly negative $12 due to overdraft fees." I turned my attention to Chloe, who had finally stopped crying and was staring at me with naked hatred. "As for you, Ms. Davis, the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan already has the encrypted ledger. Marcus sent it over an hour ago. Enjoy the G-Wagon you bought yesterday. It's the last luxury vehicle you'll own for the next 2 decades. Minimum security in Danbury is cozy this time of year, or so I'm told." I turned toward the door. "Elena, wait." Julian's voice cracked. He sounded like a stranger. "Please, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was stealing. I believed her." I paused at the threshold, looking back at the man I'd married. He looked smaller, defeated, the great Julian Vance, brought low by his own stupidity. "You didn't want to know, Julian," I said. "Believing her was easier than believing that you aren't the brilliant fund manager you pretend to be. It was easier to defend her than to admit you were wrong." I nodded to the 2 security guards who had appeared in the hallway. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Vance to the elevators. Revoke his keycard access. And Marcus, yes, Mrs. Vance, schedule a board meeting for 7 a.m. I want a vote to remove Julian as CEO before the market opens, and send a crew to the penthouse. I want his personal effects in a storage unit by nightfall. He's not welcome there anymore." I walked out, leaving behind the sound of Julian's choked protests and Chloe's frantic demands for a lawyer. The elevator doors slid shut, and I leaned against the brass railing, finally allowing myself a slow, steady breath. "Mrs. Vance." Marcus's voice returned to my ear. "The FBI has confirmed receipt. They're dispatching a car to pick up Ms. Davis now. Shall I also notify the building's security to change the locks on the executive suite?" "Yes." "And Marcus, book me a table at Caravaggio for 8. Alone. I'm suddenly in the mood for truffle pasta and a bottle of Brunello. It's amazing what a little fiscal responsibility can do for the appetite." I looked at my reflection in the mirrored elevator wall. The woman looking back wasn't angry. She wasn't heartbroken. She was free. And freedom, I decided, looked exceptionally good on me. Julian was waiting for me when I got to the Whitmore family office on 5th. He was slouched against a marble pillar, still in yesterday's Tom Ford suit, but it looked like he'd slept in it, which, knowing him, he probably had, at some dive bar in the meatpacking district. 2 of our ex-Marine security guys were already blocking him, but he was loud enough to carry across the lobby. "Elena, you sanctimonious bitch. Talk to me," he shouted, trying to shove past Daniels, my lead guard. "I know my rights. You can't just lock me out of my own life." I walked straight past the turnstile, not breaking stride. Marcus fell into step beside me, holding the elevator door. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice a monotone. "You are currently trespassing on private property. If you do not vacate the premises, we will be forced to involve the NYPD." "Shut up, Marcus. I'm talking to my wife." Julian wrenched his arm free and bolted toward me. Daniels caught him by the elbow. twisting just enough to make Julian wince. Elena, look at me. Is this how it ends? Over a misunderstanding? I stopped. I didn't want to, but I wanted to hear him dig the hole deeper. I turned, looking him up and down like I was evaluating a non-performing asset. Misunderstanding? I repeated, hitting the button for the private elevator. Julian, the only misunderstanding was me thinking you had a functional IQ above room temperature. You let a 28-year-old admin with a fake sob story funnel for $1 million out of operational accounts. That's not a misunderstanding. That's gross negligence. She said it was for her mother. He shot back, his voice cracking. She was scared. Elena, she needed me. Where were you? Off playing the ice queen at your family office. Counting beans while I was actually trying to run a business. I let out a short, dry laugh. Run a business? Julian, you couldn't run a bath without a teleprompter. I am business. Every trade you've made in the last 5 years has been cleared through my private equity fund. Every salary in that building is paid by my dividends. You're not a CEO. You're a mascot I kept around for tax breaks. His face flushed purple. You're going to pay for this. I'll sue you for alienation of affection. I'll go to the press. I'll tell them how you froze me out, how you're a controlling, vindictive. You'll do nothing. I cut him off. The elevator dinged. Because if you sue me, I'll countersue for the $4 million plus interest. And I'll have you blacklisted from every hedge fund on the East Coast before your process server finishes his coffee run. As for the press, go ahead. Let's see how sympathetic they are when the headline reads, "Former hedge fund manager duped by secretary stealing for a dead mother." Julian blinked. Dead? What are you talking about? Chloe's mother, I said, pulling up the public records on my phone. I turned the screen toward him. Died 5 years ago. Cirrhosis. The only thing Chloe was nursing was her Cayman account. But you were too busy enjoying the ego boost to check the obituaries. He stared at the screen, the fight draining out of him. He sagged against the pillar. She said she loved me. She loved your expense account. Julian, I said, stepping into the elevator. There's a difference. And you chose her. You chose her lies over my facts. You chose her tears over my loyalty. So, congratulations. You won. You're free of me. Now you get to live with the consequences. Wait, he croaked, pushing off the pillar. Elena, please. I am sorry. I was stupid. I'll fire her. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't do this. I can't even get a hotel room. My cards are all declined. I looked at him. Really looked. This was the man I'd promised to honor. The man I'd protected from his own worst instincts for a decade. And now, he was just a pathetic, entitled child begging for a handout. You're right, Julian, I said, my voice cold. You can't get a hotel room because you don't have a job. You don't have a credit history that isn't tied to me. You don't have a network that doesn't rely on my goodwill. You are, for all intents and purposes, financially non-existent. I turned to Marcus. Call building security. Have him escorted to the sidewalk. And Marcus, if he tries to come back, call the police. Charge him with trespassing. Elena, no. He screamed as Daniels and the other guard hauled him backward. You can't do this to me. I'm your husband. Not for much longer, I said as the elevator doors slid shut. Inside, the silence was immediate and absolute. Marcus's voice came through the comms. Mrs. Whitmore, the board is assembled. Also, I've taken the liberty of contacting a discreet moving service. They'll be at the penthouse at 10 to pack Mr. Vance's belongings. Make sure they leave my walk-in closet untouched. I instructed. And the art. None of that sentimental crap he bought at Sotheby's last spring. That was all commissioned under my name. Understood. Shall I have his things delivered to a storage facility in Long Island City? No. Send them to his mother's house in Rye. Let her deal with the fallout. I'm done cleaning up his messes. When the elevator opened on the top floor, I walked into the conference room. The board, 7 men and 3 women who had been skeptical of me for years, fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table, "as of this morning, Julian Vance is no longer affiliated with Vance Capital. I've frozen all liquid assets tied to his mismanagement, and I've notified the SEC of the internal embezzlement. We'll be issuing a press release within the hour." Elena, Richard Hale, the vice chairman, spoke up. He was an old money snob who'd always sided with Julian. "This is highly irregular. Julian is the face of this firm. Removing him overnight will crater our stock. Our stock is already down 4% in pre-market." "Richard," I said, sliding a report across the table. "But that's because the market sensed instability. Once they realize the dead weight has been cut, we'll recover by lunch. And as for the face of the firm, I'm looking at a room of professionals. Surely, we don't need a mediocre fund manager who can't spot a basic fraud scheme to hold our hands." I looked around the table. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you of the new structure. I will be assuming the role of interim CEO, effective immediately. We will be pivoting our focus from high-risk equities to private equity and distressed assets, my specialty. Those of you who aren't comfortable with this direction are welcome to tender your resignations. Marcus has the severance packages ready." No one moved. Richard Hale looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, but he stayed quiet. "Good," I said. "Now, let's talk about the Q3 earnings. I want a full audit of every department. Anyone who was hired based on culture fit rather than competence is gone. We're running a business, not a frat house." I spent the next 3 hours dismantling Julian's legacy. By the time I emerged, the sun was high over Central Park. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Elena, it's Julian. I'm at a diner in Astoria. I have $3.47 to my name. Please, I'm begging you, just one transfer. $5,000. I'll pay you back. I swear." I stared at the message. 3 months ago, I would have felt a pang of guilt. Today, nothing. I blocked the number and turned to Marcus. "Anything else?" "Just one item. Mrs. Whitmore." Chloe Davis was picked up by the FBI at JFK. She was trying to board a flight to Belize. She's lawyered up, but the evidence is ironclad. And Julian, last seen at a pawn shop on Steinway Street, trying to sell his Rolex. They offered him $80. He threw a fit and got tossed out. I nodded. "Keep an eye on the arrest reports. If he gets picked up for public intoxication or disorderly conduct, let him sit in the holding cell overnight. I want him to understand that the safety net is gone." I got into the back of the town car. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked out at the city. It was a jungle, and I just shed the dead weight that was slowing me down. "Home, Mrs. Whitmore?" the driver asked. "No," I said. "The office in Stamford. I want to review the Greenwich portfolio before dinner. And Marcus, cancel my subscription to Gotham magazine. I hear they're doing a feature on fallen titans." I have no interest in Julian's obituary. I opened my laptop, the blue light illuminating my face. The markets were open, and Vance Capital was ticking upward. Green, growth, profit. Julian was calling again. I silenced the phone without looking. He was a mistake I'd already written off. And in finance, as in life, you don't chase sunk costs. You move on to the next big thing. And I had a feeling the next big thing was going to be me. My cell rang at 6:17 a.m. Unknown number. Astoria Exchange. I let it ring 3 times before answering, already knowing who it was. "Elena." Julian wheezed. I could hear the static of a prepaid flip phone and the clatter of a bus in the background. "You gotta pick up. Please. I'm at a diner on Roosevelt." I got nothing left. I leaned back in my leather chair, swiveling toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River. "Good morning, Julian." I assume you're calling to negotiate a settlement. Or are we still in the denial phase? Settlement? He let out a wet, ugly laugh. I can't even settle the tab for my coffee. They won't take my card. Elena, they won't take your card either. Apparently, everything's dead. My Amex, my debit, even the damn Starbucks app on my phone. What the hell did you do? I exercised my rights under the Uniform Commercial Code and the post-nuptial agreement. I said, my tone board. I recalled all lines of credit tied to the Whitmore estate. You were an authorized user, Julian, not a co-owner. There's a difference. Though I'm beginning to realize you never understood basic financial literacy. I need cash. He hissed, lowering his voice. I need a loan. Just $5,000 to get me through the week. I'll pay you back. Double. I swear to God. Your credit score is currently in the low 400s. I replied, pulling up the report on my secondary monitor. You're a worse risk than a subprime borrower in '08. Why would I invest in a failing enterprise? Because we were married. Because you're my wife. He was shouting now, drawing the attention of the diner staff. I could hear a gruff voice telling him to keep it down. You can't just leave me on the street like a stray dog. I didn't leave you anywhere. Julian, you walked out of our marriage the second you chose Chloe's lies over my truth. Now, why are you really calling? I have a 9 o'clock with the SEC. He went quiet for a beat, the sound of him breathing heavily filling the line. It's Chloe. She's out. I saw her last night at some rooftop bar in Williamsburg. She was with some tech douchebag from Soho. She saw me, she laughed. She actually laughed when I asked for the money back, said I was a mark, and she'd upgraded to a bigger whale. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt vindication. I told you she was an opportunist, but you were too busy feeling like a savior to see you were the mark. Did you really think a woman who bought a G-Wagon mid-fraud was going to share the spoils with you? Why didn't you warn me? He demanded, his voice cracking. If you knew she was stealing, why didn't you just tell me? Why let me look like a fool in front of the board? In front of the city? I did tell you, Julian, multiple times. You called me a jealous bitch and chose to believe her. I don't enable delusion, I liquidate it. Now, you're learning the hard way that loyalty isn't about who warms your bed. It's about who protects your capital. I loved you, he whispered, the fight suddenly gone. We were happy once. Doesn't that count for anything? Happiness built on a foundation of financial dependence, and my silence isn't happiness. Julian, it's complacency, and complacency is a liability I've written off. Now, if you're calling to ask me to vouch for you with the FBI, the answer is no. How did you? Because you're predictable. I cut him off. You're going to roll on Chloe to save your own skin. And you want me to tell the U.S. attorney that you were duped and acted without knowledge. You want me to lie to the federal government to mitigate your sentence. Would it kill you to help me? He snarled. After everything I've done for you, I made you look good. Elena, I was the face so you could hide in the shadows. You were the figurehead so I could avoid the scrutiny. I corrected. And look where that got us. You're facing RICO charges, and I'm about to close a 9-figure deal. I'd say the scales have balanced themselves. I heard him shuffle the phone, his voice dropping to a desperate murmur. Elena, please, I'm begging you. I have no one. Richard Hale won't return my calls. The guys from the club won't even look at me. You're the only one who can get me out of this. Just one statement. Say I was a good husband. Say I didn't know. You weren't a good husband, Julian. You were a dependent. And I don't do character references for men who chose a criminal over their spouse. I paused, letting the silence stretch. However, I will do this. I'll provide a statement to the U.S. attorney detailing your willful blindness and your consistent prioritization of personal relationships over fiduciary duty. That should shave a few months off for acceptance of responsibility. You're a monster. He breathed. No, Julian, I'm an accountant, and the books on our marriage are finally balanced. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the desk. Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding a slim manila folder. Trace complete. He's at the George's Lounge on 31st Avenue. Should I alert the FBI to his location? Not yet. Let him sit in that grease trap for another hour. I want him sober enough to remember the taste of cheap coffee when the feds pick him up. I gestured to the folder. What's that? The divorce decree. Signed by the judge this morning. Effective immediately. You are no longer married to Julian Vance. The process server is en route to Astoria now. I took the liberty of instructing him to wear a Vance Capital lapel pin. I thought Julian might appreciate the irony. I allowed myself a small, thin smile. Good. And the SEC filing? Submitted. The press release is queued for 9:05 a.m. Vance Capital announces leadership transition. Elena Whitmore assumes CEO role. The analysts are already adjusting their projections. We're looking at a 6% bump by noon. Excellent. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Cancel my 10 o'clock. I want to be in the car when the news hits. I want to hear the city's reaction to the fact that the Ice Queen is now sitting on the throne. Very good, Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus hesitated. And Mr. Vance. When the FBI takes him in, shall I arrange for bail? Bail? I arched an eyebrow. Set it at $500. Cash only. Let him try to scrape that together from the couch cushions of whatever flop house he's crashing at. I want him to feel the full weight of every single step he takes back to that bus stop. Marcus nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Consider it done. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking on the polished concrete. As the doors closed, I glanced at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't the one who'd walked down the aisle 10 years ago. That woman was naive. This woman was solvent. My phone buzzed. A news alert, Vance Capital in turmoil. CEO Julian Vance ousted amid embezzlement scandal. I muted the notification. The story wasn't about Julian anymore. It was about the vacuum he'd left behind, and the woman sharp enough to fill it. The elevator descended, and I thought about Julian sitting in that diner, waiting for a savior who would never come. He'd spent years living off my capital, financial, social, emotional. Now, the account was closed, permanently. As the car pulled up to the curb, I slid inside, crossing my legs. Stanford office. I told the driver, take the Midtown Tunnel. I want to see the skyline one last time before the markets open. Outside, the city was waking up. People rushing to jobs, chasing dreams, drowning in debt. I used to be one of them, tethered to a man who mistook my patience for weakness. Not anymore. I pulled out my laptop, opening the presentation for the Greenwich acquisition. The numbers were solid. The growth potential was exponential. And best of all, there wasn't a single signature line on the contract for Julian Vance. Mrs. Whitmore. The driver glanced at me in the rear view. Traffic's light today. We'll be early. Good, I said, not looking up from the screen. I hate being late for my own success. The car merged onto the FDR, the morning sun glinting off the Chrysler Building. Somewhere uptown, Julian was probably being handed divorce papers. Somewhere downtown, Chloe was realizing her G-Wagon was about to be repossessed. And me? I was driving toward a future where the only name on the door was mine. The phone rang again. Julian's number. I declined the call and blocked it, finally freeing up the mental bandwidth I'd wasted on him for far too long. Marcus, I said into the car's intercom, add a line item to the Q3 budget. Recovery of legal fees from Julian Vance's personal estate. I want every cent we spend on this divorce clawed back from whatever's left of his 401k. Already noted, Mrs. Whitmore. And the U.S. Attorney's Office is requesting a formal interview regarding Mr. Vance's knowledge of the fraud. Schedule it for Friday. I'll give them the unvarnished truth. Julian Vance was a man who had every advantage and squandered them on a con artist because he couldn't stomach the idea that his wife was the genius he pretended to be. I ended the connection and looked out at the river. The water was choppy, reflecting the gray clouds above. It looked cold, unforgiving, just like the world Julian was about to discover. And I wouldn't have it any other way. The Children's Hospital Gala was always a sausage fest of old money and older grudges. For 5 years, I'd been Julian's arm candy, standing in the shadows while he shook hands and kissed babies. This year, I walked the red carpet alone. The photographers didn't shout Mr. and Mrs. Vance anymore. They shouted Mrs. Whitmore. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just gave them the profile I'd spent a fortune on and walked into the Rainbow Room. Richard Hale was waiting at the bar, looking like he'd mainlined a bottle of Macallan. He was one of Julian's biggest cheerleaders, mostly because Julian let him win at golf and Lucat the Bloomberg terminal. Elena, Richard drawled, blocking my path. He was wearing a tux that cost more than most people's rent, but it fit him like a cheap suit. Brave of you to show your face tonight. Or is desperate the word I'm looking for? I signaled the bartender for a neat pour. Richard, still coasting on your grandfather's railroad money? How's that biotech play working out? The one that tanked last Tuesday? Oh, right. You probably told everyone it was a short-term liquidity issue rather than a total misread of the FDA pipeline. His smile tightened. Ouch. Still swinging below the belt. I see. Everyone's talking. Elena, they're saying you froze him out, that you're ruthless, that you're the reason he's living in a shoebox in Astoria. He's not living in Astoria. I corrected, taking a slow sip. He's currently residing in a holding cell at Rikers Island after getting picked up for public intoxication outside this very building last week. But thanks for the update on the gossip mill. It's nice to know my tax dollars are funding such accurate reporting. Richard leaned in, his breath smelling like stale scotch. You're destroying him. The guy's a mess. No one will return his calls. He's begging for change on the subway. Doesn't that bother you? Knowing you turned a man into a ghost? A ghost? I set my glass down with a sharp clink. Richard, Julian was already a ghost. I just stopped paying the electric bill to keep the lights on. And as for destroying him, I didn't destroy anything. I withdrew my investment from a failing asset. That's not cruelty, it's capitalism. Before he could fire back, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Julian had arrived. He looked like he'd been dressed by a Salvation Army reject bin, a rumpled blazer, a stained shirt, and a desperation that radiated off him like heat. He must have been released on recognizance and come straight here, hoping for a handout or a scene. He got the latter. Elena, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Heads turned. Conversations died. You cold-hearted bitch. Get out here. Richard smirked, stepping back to watch the carnage. Well, looks like your ghost just found a pulse. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just watched Julian stagger toward me, weaving through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. He looked like a drunk at a wake. You did this, Julian screamed, jabbing a finger at me. Spit flew from his lips. You took everything. My company, my name, my life. You froze me out like I was nothing, just a number on a spreadsheet. I turned to face him fully, my expression blank. You were always a number on a spreadsheet. Julian, you just never bothered to check the ledger. She's lying, he shrieked, spinning toward the crowd. She's a predator. She uses people and throws them away. Ask her about the prenup. Ask her how she hid the money. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Most just watched, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. This was better entertainment than the string quartet. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. You're causing a scene. Again. Though I suppose that's all you're qualified for now. I loved you. He roared, tears streaming down his face. He looked pathetic a middle-aged man throwing a tantrum in a room full of his peers. I loved you, and you destroyed me. No, Julian, I said, taking a single step toward him. I lowered my voice, so only he could hear. Though the room was so quiet, I knew everyone was leaning in. You loved the idea of me, the idea of a wife who paid the bills, ignored your affairs, and let you play big shot for the cameras. You didn't love me. You loved the lifestyle I subsidized. I'll ruin you, he threatened, his voice cracking. I'll tell the press everything. I'll tell them how you manipulated the market. How I what? I challenged. How I caught you stealing. How I proved you were too incompetent to spot a basic embezzlement scheme. Julian, the only thing you're going to ruin is your chances of getting a plea deal. The FBI is probably listening to this right now. He froze, his eyes darting around the room. The reality of his situation seemed to hit him like a slap. He looked at the faces staring back at him, faces that had once smiled and nodded at his jokes, now looking at him with a mixture of pity and contempt. Elena, please, he whispered, the fight draining out of him. Don't do this. Not here. I'm not doing anything. Julian, I said, stepping back. You're doing this to yourself. You always have been. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. Security finally moved in. Two guys in black suits grabbed him by the elbows. He didn't struggle this time. He just looked at me, his eyes hollow. Come on, Mr. Vance. One of the guards muttered, let's go. As they dragged him away, he didn't scream. He just kept whispering, I loved you. I loved you. I turned back to the bar. Richard was staring at me, his earlier smugness replaced by a look of stunned silence. Value, I said, picking up my glass again. It's all about intrinsic value. Richard, some of us have it. Most don't. I drained the rest of my scotch and walked toward the auction stage. The room remained silent for a beat. Then, slowly, the hum of conversation resumed. But it was different now. The whispers weren't about Julian. They were about me. About the woman who didn't just survive a public execution, but had performed it with clinical precision. I took my seat at the head table. The auctioneer started the bidding for the first lot, a weekend at a Hamptons estate. I raised my paddle. $100,000. I said clearly. The room went silent again. Then, slowly, applause began. It started as a smattering, then grew. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't need their approval. I needed results. Marcus appeared at my elbow, leaning down to whisper, Mrs. Whitmore, the post on X is already trending. #WhitmoreVance. The sentiment is overwhelmingly in your favor. They're calling Julian a grifter, and you a queen. Good, I murmured. And Julian? Loaded into a patrol car outside. The press is having a field day. Shall I release the statement regarding the divorce finalization? Not yet. Let him sit in central booking for a few hours. I want him to have plenty of time to think about the fact that the only reason he's not in a cell right now is because I haven't decided to press charges for the emotional distress of his little performance. I looked out at the crowd. They were all watching me now, not with pity, but with a newfound respect. I wasn't the silent wife anymore. I was the woman who had liquidated her past and was now dictating her future. Marcus, I said, my voice barely audible over the applause. By the Hamptons estate. I'm tired of hotels. And make sure Julian's mother knows he's been released. She can wire him bus fare from Rye. I turned back to the auction, raising my paddle again for the next lot. The game had changed. The players had changed. And I was the only one holding all the chips. Julian wanted a war. He'd just learned the hard way that I own the battlefield. Marcus slid the manila envelope across the desk without a word. The return address was the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. Julian had taken the plea. 18 months in a minimum security facility upstate, the Club Fed version of justice, plus 3 years of supervised release and a restitution order for $2 million he'd never be able to pay. Mrs. Vance, excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus corrected himself smoothly. The final divorce decree was filed this morning. The judge signed off on the full asset forfeiture. Mr. Vance retains none of the marital property beyond the clothing he currently wears. I flipped the envelope open. Inside was a single, grainy mugshot of Julian. He looked washed out, his eyes hollow, the defiant set of his jaw replaced by a slack, defeated resignation. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with his complexion. Any last requests from the inmate? I asked, my tone flat as I scanned the sentencing memorandum. Just one. Marcus said. He asked if you'd visit before he's transferred to the facility in Otisville. Said he needed to say goodbye properly. I laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement that didn't reach my eyes. Goodbye? We said goodbye the day he chose a G-Wagon over a prenup. Tell the warden he can mail the letter. I'm done with face-to-face meetings. Marcus nodded, making a note on his tablet. Understood. And the board? They've formally voted to rebrand the firm. Effective Monday. We are Whitmore Capital. The new signage is being installed this weekend. Good, I said, tossing the mugshot onto the pile of discarded paperwork. And the foundation, the one bearing my name? Fully endowed. The first round of grants is being distributed next week to the Financial Literacy Initiative for Women. The Journal's already running a feature on it. They're calling you the architect of her own destiny. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. Architect. I like that better than Ice Queen. Less weather-related, more structural. I paused, looking out at the gray Manhattan sky. What about Richard Hale? He's been awfully quiet since the gala. A faint smile touched Marcus's lips. Mr. Hale's latest venture, that AI-driven trading platform, just received a scorching review from the SEC. Seems he misrepresented his algorithmic backtesting. His investors are fleeing. He's currently shopping for a buyer for his Hampton house. Karma's a slow creditor, but she always collects. I murmured. Speaking of collections, what's the status on Julian's mother? She was making noises about contesting the divorce on humanitarian grounds. Mrs. Vice-Signor called yesterday, Marcus reported. She's dropped the matter. Apparently, Julian informed her from the holding cell that the embezzlement was Elena's fault for being too controlling. She's since redirected her legal fund toward her own retirement account. She also mentioned she's changing the locks on the house in Rye. I allowed myself a small, satisfied exhale. Smart woman. Blood is thicker than water, but cash flow trumps both. I stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt. Schedule a meeting with the Wall Street Journal editorial board for next Thursday. I want to discuss the gender gap in asset management. It's time the industry understood that risk tolerance isn't a male trait, it's a survival skill. Consider it done. Marcus said. And Mrs. Whitmore? One last thing. Julian's attorney submitted a motion for a reduction in his restitution payment. He's claiming indigence. I turned, arching an eyebrow. Indigence. He has a trust fund from his grandfather. It's small, but it exists, which you had frozen last month due to his outstanding debts to various creditors. Marcus clarified. The trust is insolvent. He literally has $12.37 to his name. The balance is in a commissary account at the jail. I walked over to the window, looking down at the specks of people moving along Park Avenue. $12. That's the sum total of a man who thought he was a titan. Tell the judge to deny the motion. If he wants a reduction, he can earn it by teaching a class on how not to get played by your secretary to the other inmates. Marcus coughed to hide a laugh. Very good. Will there be anything else? Yes. I'm taking the rest of the day off. I'm going to my sister, Sarah's, place for dinner. Just family. No phones. No tablets. No liquidity events. I picked up my bag. And Marcus, close the door on your way out. I don't want to see another spreadsheet until Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Mrs. Whitmore. I rode the elevator down to the garage. The silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the past 6 months. My driver held the door open. As we pulled out into traffic, I looked at my reflection in the tinted window. The woman looking back wasn't the one who'd married Julian Vance. That woman was gone, liquidated and written off as a bad debt. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Can't wait to see you. The kids have been asking for their Aunt Elena. Bring that famous lasagna? I smiled, a real, unguarded smile. I'll bring two. See you at 7. I scrolled past the news alerts about Julian's sentencing and the rebranding of Whitmore Capital. I didn't need to read them. I lived them. I opened a new note on my phone and typed a single line. Value is not what you own. It's what you refuse to lose. The car crossed the Queensboro Bridge, heading toward a quiet brownstone in Brooklyn. It wasn't the penthouse, but it was mine. No liens, no judgments, no mediocre husbands draining the equity. As we drove, I thought about Julian, sitting in a cold cell, probably wondering where it all went wrong. The answer was simple. He confused my patience for permission. He thought my silence meant I didn't see his failures. He was wrong. I saw everything. I just waited until the valuation was right to sell. The car slowed in front of Sarah's brownstone. Laughter and the smell of garlic wafted from the open windows. I stepped out, the evening air cool against my skin. Mommy, Aunt Elena, my niece, Lily, launched herself off the stoop and into my arms. I caught her, lifting her easily. Hey, Munchkin, I said, kissing her forehead. Did you save me a seat at the table? Always. She giggled. Sarah appeared in the doorway, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked tired but happy. Took you long enough. We were about to start without you. I wouldn't miss it, I said, following her inside. The house was warm, messy, and alive. It smelled like home. Later, after dinner, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen while I helped load the dishwasher. You okay? She asked quietly, leaning against the counter. I looked at her, really looked. She'd been my rock through the divorce, the scandal, the relentless media cycle. Better than okay, I said. I'm free, Sarah, for the first time in a decade. I'm completely, utterly free. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Good, you deserve it. Now, about that lasagna. You're making it again next week, right? I laughed, the sound filling the small kitchen. Deal. I walked out to the car an hour later, the city lights blurring slightly. I didn't look back at the brownstone. I didn't need to. My past was settled. My future was unwritten. But for the first time, I held the pen. I pulled out my phone one last time. I drafted a quick email to Marcus, effective immediately. Dissolve the Julian Vance Memorial Scholarship Fund I set up as a joke. Redirect the funds to the financial literacy program. And Marcus, by me out of the lease on the Hamptons estate, I found a better use for my capital. I hit send and turned off the phone. The car merged onto the FDR drive, the skyline glittering in the distance. Julian was a closed chapter. Richard Hale was a cautionary tale. And I was the opening line of a much better story. The driver glanced back. Home, Mrs. Whitmore? Yes, I said, watching the lights of the city reflect in the dark water of the East River. Take the scenic route. I've earned it. The car accelerated, leaving the past behind. Ahead, the road was clear. The markets were open, and my name was on the door. Finally,